Welcome to Restorers, a Water Street Mission podcast. Over these upcoming minutes, we'll be speaking with heroes in Lancaster County and beyond who are making a positive impact on men and women experiencing homelessness and poverty. Each episode, we'll speak with an expert from the community, as well as one of our own Water Street Mission staff members, to learn more about how each of them are working to make a difference locally. Without further ado, let's dive right in.
Well, welcome to episode 8 of our Restorers podcast here with Water Street Mission, and thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to take a conversation. We've been talking about our whole person model here at Water Street, the different elements of it, and one of the key components of helping somebody overcome poverty and homelessness is meaningful employment. Getting a job, but not just getting a job, really looking at vocation, career, purpose in their employment. And that's how we view it here at Water Street. Really excited today to have our friend Vanessa Philbert, who is the CEO of Community Action Partnership here in Lancaster. CAP is probably the largest nonprofit that works and addresses issues of poverty in our community. So thanks for joining us, Vanessa.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. Could you, for those who don't know CAP, could you just tell us a little bit, maybe a 30-second overview, if you can pull that off?
I'm going to try. I'll talk Brooklyn fast. So Community Action Partnership is our local community action. We are an organization that were birthed out of the civil rights movement during the 1960s with this idea that there should be community-based organizations looking at community issues and creating community solutions. So because of that effort under the Johnson administration, there are about 1,000 community actions across the U.S., 52 in the Commonwealth, and we are Lancaster County's community action.
Awesome.
And, we exist to transform generational poverty.
Yeah, and you address needs in families experiencing poverty top to bottom, from childcare and nutrition through sustainable employment.
So we've done some interesting work over the last probably 5 or 7 years and really started to recalibrate the areas of impact that we think have synergy within the organization. So we have education as an area of impact. So we do things like Head Start for the county. We have 4 different early learning centers throughout Lancaster. We do lots of home visitation work with families and coaching for parents, and then some district-wide alignment around pre-kindergarten readiness. So that's kind of our education work. Our health work is really focused on nutrition access. So we're the countywide WIC provider. We also are the county provider for food distribution. So we support about 42 pantries across Lancaster County, usually about 1 million to 2 million pounds of food a year that we distribute through that network.
We thought we did a lot of
Water Street. It's really the partner pantries that are doing it. And then we also support seniors. So we have a few senior centers, and we do lots of nutrition education in the community. And then our third team is really focused on economic mobility. And it's this place where we think about utility assistance and rental assistance and childcare subsidy. And what we do, which is really aligned to what you all do, which is kind of this navigation, kind of life coaching element. So that's where that team sits. And then our fourth team is really focused on community initiatives. And we call that team safety and empowerment. So we're the countywide domestic violence provider. So we have a safe house, transitional house, legal services, counseling supports, all the things that survivors need. We also lead the county's reentry coalition. And then we also, back in 2018, had the opportunity to merge with Crispus Attucks Community Center. So really kind of this idea of community center and community building
right
in the
The
Southeast.
neighborhood.
So that's kind of on the groundwork that we're doing.
So pretty boring job.
I mean, we're doing nothing. That team, what are they doing? They're doing great.
CAP is such a great presence in our community and the impact you have. I live in the southeast part of Lancaster and right by Crispus Attucks, and just grateful for the work that you do and the impact you've had. And today we're going to be focusing on just one element of that, probably close to that empowerment side, and that's about employment. And so we're in this weird world right now, right, where there's it feels like there's so many jobs available. So everybody who needs a job should have a job, and that's all it takes to overcome poverty. You just need a job. We did a poverty report a few years ago, right? The mayor commissioned it. We were all a part of it. And the report came out. The solution is one good job. To me, the operable word in that is good.
You're right.
Because I think we often think, homelessness, if you could just get a job. That's a common response people have. Get a job and you won't be homeless. The reality is it's not just about a job. It's about a good job. And I'm going to put you on the spot and ask, what's the difference between getting a job and getting a good job?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's about, and we just had this great conversation with our team, it's about equitable access to what good means. And access, I think we focus a lot of time on as a community, creating access to services, access to jobs, access to, food.
Right.
But is it equitable? And what that means for us is that does it really deal with the barriers that are in that one person's way? And those barriers are unique. Right. So I think when I think about one good job, I think about family sustaining wage. Okay. And I think about it being more prescribed, right? Because if I know that it takes at least $24 an hour for a single mom with 2 kids to live a good life, then she can't work somewhere for $10 an hour.
Right. And it's even in this environment where we're seeing those lower level wages push up, we're seeing $15, $16, $17 an hour, starting wages at Whole Foods, at Target, at the warehouses are paying $18, $19 an hour. But say that number again for a mom with 2 kids.
$24 an hour.
$24 an hour.
Yeah. And, so when we think about, we try to backtrack that salary is usually connected to some sort of certification or education. Right. And we also have to take into account that while we're in this influx because of COVID of increase in starting wages, inflation is a real thing. Right. So I go to Aldi's, right, and I'm getting my stuff, and I love Aldi's, and I'm like, I used to pay $60 for this. Now it's $100. Like, so that's also a thing that we've got to think like economists when we think about this conversation, because it's not just about the job, and it's about the rent costs, it's about the credit that's in the way, it's about having to pay 3 times the security deposit, it's about all those things.
Yeah, getting the whole picture. I mean, we talked about housing in our last podcast, and we didn't even talk about, in a market like this, how landlords, you get first, last, and security deposit that's starting point. Yeah. Right? That's accepted across the board. And how many of your clients, of our guests, are able to save up 3 times their rent that easily and be
still
ready
and still pay for their everyday lives.
Right.
And we've got to think about that when we think about people who are middle income, higher income, individuals and families. They have capacity to save because those basic needs are met, right? And they're earning income in a way that they can pull something away. But when you do your basic math, right, and you're just balancing your checkbook, whatever that language is now, you can't make more money. Just doesn't, it's just not on paper, right? Those fixed expenses still exist. You still have dreams and hopes for your future, and you're trying to find the space to build capacity to take a leap from where you are today to where you hope to be tomorrow. And that isn't easy.
Let alone dealing with those crises that might come up from 100%. Time to time. Right.
And the things that for some of us, and I say some of us because, I feel like my lived experience as a person who grew up and lived, poor, low income, for a long time, even here in Lancaster as a working professional, I made probably $40,000 a year. Like that was at my max, but I also had a GED, right? So I had this limit of what was available to me in opportunity because of these, this criteria around education. But when I made the move from mid-level manager to senior leader to CEO, right, I'm in a totally different place, but it's also a place that's unfamiliar to me. Right, it's a place that I'm still learning what mindset has to happen there, what behaviors, what goals and habits do I have to embrace? Because, it's like a muscle memory thing. I know how to live in survival mode, but I don't know how to build for tomorrow. So I think that's the other thing. It's, have a good job. We want that. We want people to get access to what's the equitable path to that good job. Knowing that for some jobs, I think I was just looking at a stat that said like 33% of the jobs that we have here in this community don't require anything more than a high school diploma. That's not a terrible number.
Yeah, no.
But when you think about the quality of the job,
right.
So one is how hard is it to do physically, the demand, and how difficult is it to make that wage of $24 an hour in that kind of role. Yeah. And we still need those jobs to happen.
Right. They're critical to the rest of our economy.
To the rest of the world,
and to the lifestyles that candidly our community has chosen to live, right?
Yep.
So we have to have those service industry jobs. We have to have those, behind the scenes manufacturing and production jobs and warehouse jobs. It helps fuel our economy, but if it's not sustaining families, it ends up having this cyclical effect.
Yeah, and it's a churn, right? So then you have people kind of moving from job to job. There's a great piece, and I'll get it to you guys, with the Pew Institute, where they have this 3-minute video, and it's people kind of, stick figure people kind of on this stairs. It's like an escalator. And, when we think about economic mobility, we think about everyone going up.
Right.
But when we think about economic justice, it's not people just going up the escalator. It's people moving from the bottom of the escalator to the middle, to the top. So when you think about being at the airport and you're like in a rush, you're skipping people on the escalator, even though you're all going up.
Right,
There's movement happening. And what we know is true is that the bottom fifth and the top fifth of the wealth continuum always stays there generationally. So if you're in the lowest fifth percentile of low-income people, generation to generation, you stay right there. It's the hardest to move out of. Yeah. And if you're in the highest wealth bracket of that fifth, the hardest to drop out of. Because this idea of generational is...
And the protections that are in place because of that.
Right.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Key.
And I mean, that speaks to, so that difficulty, the challenge of somebody moving out of generational poverty, taking steps forward towards even lower middle class and kind of a sustainable... thriving lifestyle in their own home, in their own apartment that they can legitimately afford. Some of the barriers, there's a common term that's come. I learned it from Bridges Out of Poverty, and I know it's common, especially in your work. This idea of a cliff effect that happens even as people are taking steps forward in their job. So you're working a $12 an hour job. You get that raised to $13, $14 an hour, or maybe you've got an opportunity to take a step forward to even $15, $17 an hour. But the net impact on your family actually may not be positive. You might go from $13 an hour to $17 an hour and actually be worse off as a family. How is that possible?
So how that's possible is it's the construct of our support system, right? So when we think about the things that we give access to, right? This access versus equitable access. Access to, let's say you get SNAP benefits, you're collecting food stamps, right? So I'm a working family, but I still qualify for food stamps. For those of us, to our Aldi's experience, food's a real expense, and we need it, right? And we need healthy food options, which also cost more to live healthy lives. So when we think about someone who is, earning the $12 an hour, now they get this bump to $14. The employer's excited because we feel like we've just done something great. Look at us, right? What we haven't calculated is, will that bump them off of some of those supports, and what is the net benefit to that, or the net, penalty of that? So what happens in my world is that, we've got to get more clear about what's the formula. So there's two things I want to say about the cliff effect that I think are important. One is supports like food stamp benefits or WIC services or child care subsidy. There's a responsibility we have to remove the shame of that. Right?
Absolutely.
And there's a responsibility we have to help people understand that that's part of this person's financial portfolio today. And we've got to learn how to share language across the continuum between what we think poor people talk about and what we think prosperous people talk about. And this idea of a financial portfolio is common language to people who consider themselves, middle class or wealthy.
Investments, it's
it's my assets, it's my savings.
Extra stream of income.
But it's the same for a person who's living in a low-income situation. They also have a financial portfolio. It just includes different things.
Right.
So what we have to do is create space and coaching around how do we advise people around how to make those decisions, right? Around saying, okay, if you take that job at $15 an hour, this is what you're going to lose, but this is what you'll gain.
Right.
So we have families, this happens with us with Head Start often, is that we have Head Start families who have to income qualify to be in the program. So under 150% of the poverty guideline, right? And they don't want to work yet, not because they don't want to work, but because they don't want to lose the benefit of Head Start for their kids. Because
if they take that job now, my kid won't qualify for Head Start, and there aren't other programs that I can afford.
Right, and then I'm paying child care.
Yep.
So we have families who defer their hope to be in the employment field because they're going to wait, because their kids, the long-term benefit of their kids' education is cemented in that Head Start experience, right? And what we have to do is say, oh, that's a strategy. How do we embrace that strategy?
And in the environment that they're living in, that is the best choice
That's
for
the
them.
best choice for them. And that's why agency is so important. We've got to trust that people know what's best for themselves. Our job is to help them navigate the construct that exists. and to make it beneficial to them. Because what we know is true about people who have access to wealth is that they're doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. They're navigating and figuring out how to make this structure work for them. So it's just a reframe.
I think that's such an important insight for us to have when we think about this idea and the role that career and employment plays in the lives of those trying to get out of poverty, get out of homelessness. It's not a simple solution. There's so many layers to it. And you only brought up a couple examples: childcare and education and WIC for nutrition. Right. But there are so many other layers. There's transportation, benefits that you could get for that. There's subsidies for healthcare coverage. There's rental assistance. All those different things that you start creeping up the ladder. Income-wise, you start losing those benefits, and that's the danger. That's something very real that we, working with our guests here at Water Street, people are shocked to hear that there are people coming in the door at Water Street experiencing homelessness, needing to stay in a shelter, who have jobs. Yeah. And sometimes the jobs aren't poor-paying jobs. They're, again, that $12, $13, $14, $15 an hour, but those other sustainable pieces aren't there. Right. And whether it's a family that their landlord has decided they're looking at the market and they're like, hey, I could get 25% more for this apartment if this family's out. Okay, the year's up.
Yeah, right. I'm not renewing this lease.
Renewing the lease. Right. They're out, and then they're doubled up with friends for a while, and eventually that falls apart. They come here, working a job, and then but the challenge is how to help them take that next step and find the right pathway. Not just the right job, but the right pathway to sustainable living wage.
And it's also the responsibility of the employer. So this is the place where I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, because I think this is the sector that's missing from this conversation. I think the nonprofit sector has held on to this as our responsibility, but it's a collective responsibility. So one, I'm going to say to the employers looking over here, pay more. Keep paying more. So don't let this conversation be the reason that says, oh, this is why we're not going to increase our wages.
I'm going to interrupt with a quick story. Because a friend of mine literally just told me the story a month ago of his experience, and I won't name the employer, working in the social service industry for years and years and years, and frustrated that his pay wasn't going up and everything. And he went and finally got the nerve up to address his boss and say, look, I've been here. I've been a good employee. People are going left and right. I deserve more. And his boss said, we can't pay you more, but here are some of the supports you qualify for. And listed all these things to provide supports and refused to pay him more, but pointed him to these other resources and everything. And I'm like, on the one hand, like, good for him to be aware of these supports that could help his employees. Shame on him for thinking that that's an excuse not to pay a livable wage. Yeah. And I was shocked. And
I remember having a conversation with someone who was basically saying, well, CAP needs to do better. We can always do better. Yeah. And, that organizations like a Target are paying this. Yeah. And, I paused to say, you're right, they are. And they should have always been. Right. Because they're a profitable organization. So when you're managing a nonprofit, you have lots of limits around the extra resources. Sure. But you've got to get creative and stretch yourself to say, how do we create this space? Because I know for us, we just moved to a $15 minimum wage for all of our staff and manage a lot of compression points in doing that. We have over 350 CAP team members. Yeah. That experience, that impacted 126 of our staff. Yeah. That's huge. Wow. It's huge. But I had to do it in a way that we had to look at every program budget and say, can we sustain this? Yeah. We might be able to do it this year, but do we have the budget for it next year and the year to come? Right. Because we don't want to create a space where we're making these adjustments that we can't sustain.
Then you're cutting jobs 2 years out.
100%.
And we went through the same process here at Water Street. We implemented a compensation philosophy that resulted in over 50% of our staff getting significant increases when we first implemented it. Yeah. It cost us $1 million that the board had to say, can we afford this in our reserves and can we sustain it long term? Because again, we're a nonprofit dependent on donations, and we're grateful for our supportive community and for a board that thinks about caring for our staff well 100%. To make sure we're paying that livable wage and providing all the supports we can.
Yeah, and ultimately we know that we have people who are a part of our team that still do qualify for benefits, right? Would I love to get to a place where we paid so well that they didn't qualify? Absolutely. But that's the stretch that we have to continue to move for. And if we can do that in a sector that doesn't really generate revenue, then I'm just asking business communities to think about how they could do the same.
Yeah. That's such an important comment. And our second part of our conversation is going to be with one of our Step Up coaches. And Step Up is working with employers to identify good, sustainable jobs for our guests. Not just, again, the focus of our program isn't just like get that first job. So many of our guests come in the door with that mindset. And again, I love your analogy of like helping people understand their financial portfolio, the whole picture of it. And the fact that we don't use that language with people who are in lower income jobs. I think it's so important to change that culture, begin thinking about the whole array of the resources and the intangible resources that come to the table in our community. Like some of those supports are not going to be financial supports, but it's the relationships. It's a connection to a local church, to a community center like Crispus Attucks, where we know we're going to have supports in certain areas to help bridge until we can get to that sustainable wage.
Yeah. And when you think about the Bridges Out of Poverty work, social capital is so important. It is the thing that when we start thinking about middle class and wealthy individuals, that's where they really thrive. It's in their networks. And what we've got to figure out is how do we create networks that are healthy and vibrant for people who are lower income so that they can have access to the benefits of those networks. So and sometimes language and using language that's similar helps to bridge that gap, and it doesn't feel so far away because we're kind of talking the same language.
That's great.
Yeah.
Man, so many, I could take this conversation in 10 different directions from here. We might have to save it for another podcast because I think we're about at our time limit. But thank you so much, Vanessa, for the insights you've shared today around this critical issue about how do we find sustainable, meaningful employment for individuals coming out of poverty, coming out of homelessness. Thank you for the work that you and your team over at CAP do. We love partnering with you and the impact that you have in our community.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And I'll just say there's a quote by Nelson Mandela that we've been spending a lot of time with, and I'll probably get it wrong, but it's something like, overcoming poverty isn't a gesture of charity, it's an act of justice. So I really love that idea of like this work is about justice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
And stick with us. We'll be starting the second part of our conversation with one of our Step Up coaches, Joe Larkin. I want to give a profound thanks to our Season 1 podcast sponsor, Rogers & Associates, who's helping us tremendously in this first year of the Restorers podcast. They're a wealth management firm that helps clients become financially independent for retirement. You can learn more about them online at rogers-associates.com or by calling 717-560-3800. That's Rogers, RODGERS-associates.com or by calling 717-560-3800. Thank you so much, Rogers & Associates. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation. Today, again, we're talking about careers, jobs, vocation, and how that interacts with homelessness. Really enjoyed the first part of our conversation with Vanessa as we were looking at some of the big picture challenges in that arena. And now the second half of our conversation, I'm excited that we have Joe Larkin, one of our Step Up coaches here at Water Street, to join us to talk a little bit more about what's happening at Water Street and how we walk specifically in that journey with our guests around this issue. Joe's been with Water Street for 2.5 years and in this role. So thank you so much for being here, Joe.
Oh, good to be here, Jack.
Yeah, and I want to start with kind of a basic question. So many people, not everybody, but often when we see somebody who's experiencing homelessness, you hear that reaction from many people of, why don't you just get a job? Especially in a market like this, right? There are jobs. It seems like there are jobs everywhere. I know we're struggling to fill positions here at Water Street, as are our friends and nonprofits. Businesses have signs up, we're understaffed. There are jobs everywhere.
True.
Why don't you just get a job?
Yeah.
There's no reason for you to be homeless if you only had a job. What's your reaction to that? What's your thoughts on that?
If it was that easy, right?
Right.
I think one of the cool things being here at Water Street, each guest is an individual. So it's not, here's a program, you fit in, and this is what we're going to do. We meet the guest. We work with them individually, see their strengths, their weaknesses. I basically think, every guest I've met since I've been here, Jack, has had a job or some multiple jobs. So what happened? Why isn't that easy to say, let's just go back there and do what you're doing? So, instead of, I think sometimes with the guests, the impulse is to take the first thing that comes along because I have nothing. So I'm just going to jump. They see a number, it's $18 an hour, whatever it might be.
Right.
And without considering the big picture, they're in a situation that just doesn't work well. So it isn't just getting a job. And I think for us here at the Mission, what we can do is let's look back at what you did. What did you find life-giving? What did you find that was life-stealing? And why didn't it work out? So it isn't just getting a job. It's like, it could be, with character development. It could be, I really struggle with authority. I was late a lot. So it could be so many factors. So we hope, to work with that here to find a better fit, to do some career exploring what kind of careers, testing can we do to say, hey, this is a good fit. Did you ever consider this? I think they get in a pattern of this is all I've done, so this is all I can do. So, we try to give get them hope and realize you have more to bring to the table than just getting a job.
Right.
And finding yourself in a situation that's inconvenient or it's not a good fit.
Well, and it's interesting to hear, and I think we need to be reminded of that most of the people who are coming through the door here, they've had jobs.
Yeah.
Some of them have jobs when they come through the door here. It's not just the lack of income that leads to homelessness. There are so many other, and in our other podcasts, we're talking about this whole person model and the fact that the roots of homelessness, it's not the same for everybody. Everybody's journey that led them here is different. So it's not, for many, many of our guests, it's not just about, do I have enough money to afford? And we've talked about the lack of affordable housing. So what is enough money? Yeah. But I think you said something in there about, that might be the short-term answer. Just get a job. Yeah. You see that number, $18 an hour or whatever. I could afford an apartment on that. Do you have any examples or stories of somebody who took that path, who said, look, I just want to get a job. They see a number, they grab a hold of it, they take that job, but it doesn't solve their issues?
It doesn't, and for a lot of it doesn't last long.
Yeah.
I mean, they get into a situation, whether it's the shift or the physical demands of the job, and they just can't do it. So they end up leaving that position very quickly.
Yeah.
We take an approach. One of the things we do, it's pretty cool, is we kind of like take it backwards. Instead of saying, hey, I want to make 15 an hour, 16, I said, let's just do a projected budget. What is it going to cost, for housing? We know the housing market here and what that is. What does it cost to eat? How about transportation? So we accumulate all that information, almost like fixed expenses, and then work from there and say, here's this number, so you need to earn this. So it's just looking at, to look and say, I need a position that pays at least this much to be able to do what we just laid out within that budget. Right. So that's helpful to them instead of jumping into something later on. For them, it just doesn't work. Yeah. They did impulsively took that position without.
And they never did the math, and then they're trying to fit their budget into a number that they've already committed to.
Yeah, and they exceeded it with their needs. So does that make sense?
Absolutely. And so that I love the fact that the thought process goes beyond what does that number look like? Because again, you hear $17 an hour, you're like, great, but depending on what the apartment costs are utilities included? Right. All those other dynamics. How far away is the job? How am I going to get there?
That's a biggie.
Transportation costs are often overlooked in that dynamic. So I'm making $17 an hour, but I'm spending $15 every day to get there. So I've just lost. That's the equivalent to making $15 an hour if I could walk there, right? So those dynamics, I love the fact that you're helping our guests think through all those implications before they take the step out. And then even, you find the job that's the right number, but it's the wrong fit. A sustainable career or employment that's going to help somebody exit homelessness isn't just about the dollar figure. Right. Tell me a little bit about how Step Up, how you walk with guests around that factor.
Yeah. We've had some real joys in that and some disappointments. For instance, I can sit with a guest, and what we do is we talk about, what did you used to do? Did you have a job that you really disliked? Why did you dislike it? Did you have a position that you found life-giving, enjoyed? Why did you like that? So we start to identify, would you like to do that again, or something else that's related to that field, and find that fit. For instance, we had a guest who, grandfather, then father, then him, had a painting business.
Okay.
50, 60 years painting business. So our guest had 35 years experience.
Wow.
So we identified that. I said, did you enjoy it? Did you get burnt out on it? You want to get away from it as far as you can? Or did you really? He said, no, I really enjoy it. We had a little job fair down in the Enrichment Center a little over a year ago, and he applied to Home Depot. He was hired. They were thrilled. I mean, to get somebody walking the door with 35 experience, it was a really good fit.
Yeah.
So, with others, so that was a sustainable wage, a life-giving position, and a sense of purpose and validation for him, because they looked to him like, John, can you help us out?
Yeah.
Sorry, put a name out there. But can you help us out?
Yeah.
He had more experience than anybody else on that staff, so it was really a blessing.
Well, and nice end of that, well, not end of that story, but a piece of that story. I ran into him at Home Depot one day, and he helped me with some things. I was like, hey, I didn't know you were here.
Yeah.
And we've talked several times about his job there. He loves it.
He does.
Like, he loves the people he works with. He loves the environment and the way he's been treated. And this is not an advertisement for Home Depot, but it was the right fit for him.
Yes.
And it's been life-giving. Like, he looks like a different guy since he's been working there.
He said he's never felt this good in his life. Yeah. I mean, there's other components. It's not because he's working at Home Depot,
right?
Stirring paint, but it's just the whole, like you said, the whole person model here.
Yeah.
That he never knew how good he could feel, how life could be different, apart from some of the struggles that brought him to Water Street.
Yeah, and touching on that whole person model, like what have you seen, whether here at Water Street or elsewhere, that experience? So we talk about all those other factors that can lead to homelessness, that can perpetuate somebody's journey in homelessness, mental health, all those things. When you're in the wrong job, even if the paycheck is the right size, how have you seen that impact people's journeys?
Yeah, even my own life experience. I've been in jobs that weren't a good fit, but it was sometimes just the demand of having a family. It's like you can't go anywhere. But I see the stress. For guests who are in the wrong position, the anxiety, defeated, depressed, just really struggling, like the desire to go, even show up.
Right.
It's really life stealing for them.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because all of us can relate to that, right? We haven't all been in a position that was life stealing, but I think many people can relate to the idea of being in a job that you don't love, really struggling and how that impacts. But the majority of us, we have other supports in our life that can help us through that season. Yeah. And we may put up with it for a long time, depending on what the opportunities are. We may be able to get out quickly, but we've got those supports to help us manage through that. Our mental health doesn't tank completely. But when you've already been experiencing homelessness, when you have other factors that are holding you down, you've had trauma in your life, then you have this life-stealing experience in a job that's a horrible fit. Somebody who loves the outdoors and is creative, and the only job they could get was in a warehouse, working one corner of it, so they feel claustrophobic and repetitive, and it's just not how they're wired. Others who might thrive in that situation, but they're having already experienced what they have, like they don't have those resources to hold them up through that season to get to the next thing, and they end up unemployed again, and their issues have compounded.
Yeah. And I wanted to clarify my life-stealing experience is not here. But,
thank you.
This is like some of the best days of my life, in all sincerity. But so when we're coaching the guest who's in a situation like that, before we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, let's explore. Are you having struggles with a coworker, or are you having struggles with those in authority? So it may not be the position that they despise or hate so much or dread. It could just be interrelational type things that we could work with in character development. Yeah. So maybe try to resolve those. Maybe suggest to them have a conversation with that person or those persons, and so sometimes that's a resolution to it. And other times it's just it isn't a good fit. Like you said, they're wired to do something else.
I love you point that out. because no job is perfect. And even in a job that might be a good fit, there are going to be times where it feels, whether it's interpersonal, whether it's a supervisor, whether it's my own ability to deal with the ups and downs and how I'm reacting to it. And that's Step Up is wired for that, right? Our Step Up program is designed where we can walk alongside as a coach. You're there to connect with somebody about what their experiences are on the job, where they're struggling, how they're feeling. I love that. So it's not just, 2 months in, oh, I don't like this job. Okay, let's find you something new. It's like, well, what don't you like? Let's walk through it. That's another thing that we have with Step Up, and why we don't encourage people to, hey, you landed a new job, it pays this much, let's get you a house and move you out.
Exactly.
Because now we've got a time in a safe place where we can walk with them on that journey. Because as you said, most of our guests, it's not that they've never had a job that landed them here. So just because they got a new job doesn't mean they can sustain it. And we want to walk with them to make sure they're building that inner reserve, the skill sets, finding the right fit so that they can stay in a job and be sustainable once they move out.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes where the real coaching begins on our end, because they might have a pattern of behavior at the job, and maybe that's starting to surface again after the honeymoon period's over, so to speak. So we get to meet with them and talk about some of the dilemmas and some of the joys that they're experiencing. And, the cool thing with Step Up, because we're building a relationship. This is not like come in here, category A, B, C. It's building a relationship. So, having that relationship makes it easier when difficulties arise, whether work-related, that we can really be authentic with each other to deal with these problems. Because it could be humbling. It could be, I'm not doing fast enough. My boss is on me because I'm too slow. And, have those kind of discussions. So which is, takes a lot of courage to put that on the table.
And it's great to have somebody to help process that and walk with you through it. And so the role of a Step-Up coach is so important. I'm wondering, Joe, if... I know I've heard some great stories of some of our guests' journeys, really understanding themselves and making these connections into sustainable kind of career and vocation that brings life to them. I'm wondering if you have any stories that you could tell us of maybe just one of those shining success stories.
It's really fascinating how, one of our guests here, Roger, went through the program, was very, very diligent. Like we ask our guests why they're here to do some tours, some tasks, you're part of the community. And he, I'd say to the least, excelled in doing that. The dining hall team just absolutely loved Roger. He was, such a part of the team and just really a servant's heart to be a part of. So he really exemplified some great qualities for him to go forward outside of Water Street. So he took a position at Tyson Foods, which is probably 12, 13 miles away. And he didn't have a vehicle, and the bus ran to get him there, but the bus didn't run to bring him home. So he had 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, how do I get back to Water Street? When I was talking to him about it, I said, what about transportation? He said, I got it handled. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, I bought a bicycle. I'm like, okay, Roger just goes for it. So I'm like, okay, if anybody can do it, so he has that kind of resolve.
But he's talking about a bike ride at 1 or 2 in the morning.
1 or 2 in the morning.
12, 14 miles.
Could be raining, could be snowing, could be after working for 10 hours. Physical labor on his feet. And so that went for a while, and it was beating him up pretty good. He went out and purchased an electric bike. So that cut his commute like significantly, where he's still refreshed and able to get up and go to the next day. Still wasn't ideal, weather, things like that, traffic, safety. We mentioned to him, Mike and I mentioned to him, QBP, Quality Bike Parts. It's a company that's here. They have different locations throughout the country. And they have a really great reputation as one of the best places to work for. And I said, Raj, with where you're working at now and the toll it's taking, with the commute and riding your bicycle, maybe we need to find something that's more amenable to, transportation and it's closer to home and for your health. And I said, QBP. We had met them at a job fair and really were impressed with the individual that we had met. So we did the online application, and he got an interview. At that time, it was COVID-y. So he, was a phone conversation. Then he did a like a Zoom conversation. They brought him out. They showed him the facility, told him what the requirements look like day to day, what it's going to look like for him. And I thought it was so interesting. He bought a bicycle to go to Tyson.
Yeah.
He bought an electric bike to go to Tyson.
Yeah.
He is working at the bike place now. And it's just wild. It's a very short commute, maybe 15 minutes on his bicycle.
Wow.
Loves it. Absolutely loves it. It's a great fit.
Yeah.
He's working a 3-day shift and has 4 days off. Has great benefits.
Wow.
And I still meet with Roger, kind of to tap into what you asked, Jack, is that our relationship doesn't end. Roger no longer is here. He had a place. He's a veteran. He got a place off campus.
Awesome.
That's going well, but the relationship maintains. It's not like you walk out that door and it's over.
Right.
Now it's the guests who say, Joe, I'm going to continue this.
Yeah.
It's not an enforced thing, and we have. And so we get to peek into how's work going for you, how's your financial world going, how are those things. It's not prying because we've established a relationship.
Yeah,
so he's doing really well, and it brings me such joy. I'm so proud of him.
That's such an awesome story, and to see how God brought those things together, and his interest in bikes and need for it, and it just feels like that's so much more sustainable to move out. Like if he had moved out, found an affordable place, but had to continue to, like, how long can you maintain that commute? How long can you keep doing that to yourself for a job that you're not? It might be a decent job, and Tyson's a great employer, but is that sustainable long term? Now he's got something that's in his passion.
Yes.
It's closer. All those other factors are easier to overcome. Man, what a great story, and I'm grateful for your relationship with him, that you continue to walk with him, the impact that Step Up had, not just in Roger's life, but in the lives of so many of our guests.
Yeah.
It's a challenging issue, and it's not just about a job. And I love that you and the rest of the Step Up coaches carry it that way and walk with our guests to help them find meaning, fulfillment, and purpose, not just the income they need, so that they can be sustainable. And, as we continue to walk through and talk about different elements of our whole person model, Joe, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for sharing those stories.
Good to be here,
and the heart of Step Up.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack.
And thank you for joining us on the podcast today. We appreciate you going on this journey with us, and hope that you enjoyed our conversation.